You can make more friends in a month by trying to get interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Dale Carnegie. Welcome to Session 11. We've now come a long way in our discussion of people skills and how they can be assertively put into action. There are only 2 sessions left in the program, but I think you'll agree that they're among the most practical and important. Conflict is a reality in the workplace, but it's a reality that's rapidly becoming less tolerable or acceptable. There are many reasons for this. Legal issues around conflict have come to the fore, and expensive court fees have become the consequence of what used to be merely unpleasant incidents. This is especially true when the conflict erupts around issues of race, gender, age, ethnicity, or many other sensitive areas. Most disturbingly, there have been well-publicized incidents in which workplace conflicts have turned violent. All these factors have made tools for conflict prevention and resolution more valuable than ever before. At the outset, let's get a perspective on exactly what's involved in these kinds of situations and how complicated they can become. To do that, we'll look at an incident from the life of a man who is better known for other things than getting into fights. But as you'll see, that reputation came later in his career. In 1842, Abraham Lincoln was 32 years old and was serving his 3rd term in the Illinois state legislature. Lincoln had already acquired a reputation as a hard-working lawyer, something of an athlete, and a gifted teller of humorous stories. He also had a habit of writing editorials and letters to the editor of his local newspaper. Often these were laced with self-deprecating jokes at his own expense, but not always. Sometimes Mary Todd, his future wife, helped him compose his submissions to the newspaper, and these collaborations tended to have a more aggressive kind of wit. Usually Lincoln and Mary used the pseudonym Rebecca to sign their letters. In the spring of 1942, Lincoln wrote a letter to the newspaper that explicitly attacked another state official named James Shields. This individual was not exactly a popular man about town. He was widely viewed as a braggart and a loudmouth. In his letter, Lincoln used a satirical style to attack Shields for his political views, and he also called Shields a liar and a coward. Strangely, after the first letter appeared, 3 more followed in rapid succession, all of them attacking Shields. Shields himself was outraged. He demanded to know who had written all these letters signed with the name Rebecca. Of course, Lincoln was puzzled too, since he had only written the first letter, but he soon found out that Mary Todd and a friend of hers were the culprits. In order to protect the identities of the women, Lincoln took responsibility for all of the letters. But Shields was by no means satisfied. In fact, he challenged Lincoln to a duel. Lincoln had no choice but to accept, but this marked a real turning point in what today would be called his people skills. Lincoln realized that he had been making a tremendous mistake writing that first provocative letter. Although Shields was indeed an extremely unpleasant character, it was clear to Lincoln that he himself had provoked this conflict, and now he was going to have to fight a duel over it. According to the rules of dueling, it was up to Lincoln to choose the weapons. Since Shields was only 5'9" and Lincoln was 6'4", Lincoln sought to maximize his height advantage by selecting extremely long cavalry swords. But before the duel actually took place, Lincoln wrote one more letter, this one to Shields himself. In the letter, Lincoln offered to print a public apology to Shields in the newspaper. For a man who was already a public figure with high political ambitions, this was a bold step. But Lincoln knew that he had caused the conflict. It was up to him to resolve it, even if it meant losing face. Shields, however, refused to accept Lincoln's offer, and the duel took place as scheduled. Fortunately, as the duel began, Shields quickly realized that Lincoln's long reach created a hopeless mismatch. Lincoln made this clear by reaching over Shields' head with his sword and cutting off a branch of a tree. At this point, friends of both men intervened and the duel came to an end. So did the conflict. The men shook hands and returned to their homes. But Lincoln had learned something very important. He never again wrote an anonymous letter. He never again directed his wit at another person in public. Years later, he acknowledged that the Shields incident was one of the most painful memories of his life. But without doubt, it was also one of the most important memories. What he learned from it was put to use in his compassion and respect for the Southern states after their defeat in the Civil War, and for his refusal to enact harsh punishments that many recommended. It's worth noting, too, that during the war, Lincoln asked his old enemy Shields to serve as a general in the Union Army. Lincoln, perhaps better than anyone in American history, knew the dangers of conflict on both the personal and the national level. Hopefully our discussion here will help you to prevent conflicts as well as to bring them to an end. In discussing workplace conflicts and how you can assertively resolve them, we'll make a distinction between two kinds of situations. First, those in which you are directly involved as one of the parties in conflict, and secondly, conflicts in which you are a third party or mediator. When you are directly involved in a conflict as one of the participants, there are certain assertive steps that you can and should take as soon as possible. As we look at these one by one, please notice that none of them depend on the specific issues around which the conflict is taking place. None of them focus on determining who is right or wrong, or who is the good guy or the bad girl. In the worst-case scenario, those questions can be decided by lawyers or professional mediators. For our purposes, however, we'll simply assume that angry conflict in a business setting is inherently negative and unproductive. Our goal will be to assertively bring it to an end as quickly and as fairly as possible. In looking at any conflict situation, a good place to start is by identifying the variables, the places where there's a real possibility for change or adjustment. When you're one of the principals in a conflict, you'll sometimes see many of these areas and sometimes very few. But one element in the conflict is always amenable to change, and that is your own thoughts, feelings, and responses. Even when the other side in a conflict seems totally unwilling to change, you can still exert a positive influence, and it's up to you to do so. True, your ego can get in the way, but being flexible to some extent doesn't mean you have to let other people walk all over you. This is just another instance where you can choose assertiveness over aggressiveness or passivity. Let's look at some specific elements of making that choice. First, make an honest assessment of the power balance in the specific situation. One of the hard things about business conflict is the fact that it quickly becomes totally unsentimental. When money and workplace issues are involved, it's amazing how quickly everything else burns away. All the lunches, the company retreats, the softball games mean nothing when the pedal meets the metal in a corporate setting. Ironically, this is also something that makes business conflicts easier to handle than serious arguments between spouses or close friends. In those conflicts, there really are deep emotional issues that can make a clear resolution very difficult to come by. In business arguments, you may be shocked to realize how little personal feelings mean when push comes to shove. But once you've gotten over that surprise, at least you can get a very clear picture of who's holding which cards. Of course, the winning hand may or may not win, depending on how those cards are played. As you take a read on the power balance in the conflict, look at the difference between what the parties merely want and what they really need. Here's an example of what this means. Steve was a human resources expert. He created roundtable meetings in which corporations could hear experts speak about HR issues and in which information could be exchanged. Steve organized an average of one roundtable a month at sites in the United States, the Pacific Rim countries, and Western Europe. It was very important to Steve's business that these events take place in first-class hotels with excellent dining and accommodations, and that the guest speakers were recognized authorities in the field. Steve was very good at making this happen, and his business was very successful for more than 20 years. More recently, it came to Steve's attention that his website needed to be updated to match the other aspects of his events. Steve had had a website for a number of years, but he had never paid much attention to it. The website was just one of several ways in which potential clients could get information about the business, or current clients could find out about upcoming events. But when a client mentioned that Steve's website looked embarrassingly shabby, he began to search for a first-rate website designer. Steve interviewed a number of people, and before long he found Sharon, who seemed to have exactly the capabilities that he needed. There was only one problem. When Sharon told Steve about her fee, his jaw just about hit the floor. The very idea of paying that much money for website design seemed outrageous. Sharon, however, pointed out that hers was a reasonable market price for a top-flight designer. According to her, this was what Steve would have to pay if he wanted outstanding work. He could pay less, of course, but he would also get less than the optimum result. Although Steve and Sharon had gotten along well in their initial discussions, it was amazing how quickly their negotiations grew hostile. To Steve, it almost seemed impertinent of Sharon to suddenly grow so demanding when she had been so friendly up to this point. On a purely emotional level, he wanted nothing more to do with her. But if Steve got rid of Sharon, where would he be? Sharon was telling the truth when she said that hers was the going rate for good web designers. When he took the emotion out of it, Steve saw that his need was for exactly what Sharon offered. What he wanted was something very different, a first-rate designer who would charge much less money. But in the real world, it seemed that this wasn't available. In any case, he would certainly have to do a lot more interviewing before he found someone like that. What's more, Steve actually did have the financial resources to pay what Sharon was asking. Really, the basis of the conflict was the fact that Steve felt personally insulted by what Sharon was asking. Once he took those feelings out of the equation and looked at the business realities, it was actually easy to close the deal with Sharon. This was not backing down. This was assertive conflict resolution, which means being assertive with yourself as well as the other party. So an honest assessment, nuts and bolts assessment of the situation and your needs in it, is the first step towards solving it. Making this assessment is your responsibility, but it's not your only responsibility in assertive conflict resolution. You also need to give the other side whatever information is necessary for them to reach the same level of clarity that you have. In the situation we just looked at, Sharon did a good job of that. She was clear about what she needed. She was clear about the fact that she could not work for less, and she made it clear that her position was in line with the realities of the marketplace. This is neither aggressiveness nor passivity. It's assertiveness. Don't be threatening, but state your position very clearly. Present your needs in the situation and stick to them. If you do this honestly and convincingly, there's a good chance you can prevent a conflict from getting started. If a conflict does start, you can keep it from escalating or bring it quickly to an end. If you find yourself in conflict, think of how small children behave when they're arguing in the sandbox. And don't act like that. Don't call people names, don't point fingers, don't try to paint yourself as completely blameless at the expense of the other party. Those tactics only increase self-justification and defensiveness by the other side. Talk about your own behavior rather than anyone else's. If you're feeling impatient, it's much better to say, "I'm going to wait until you're finished talking," than, "Why don't you shut up already?" It's not easier to show that kind of restraint, but it's much more productive in the long run. Another key point: keep the focus on the present or the future. Don't get hung up on the past. Invoking what happened last week or last year is almost always a bad idea in business conflicts, regardless of the point you're trying to make. Often people refer to past successes as a way of getting what they want now. "Look at all I've done for this company in the last year. You can't treat me like this now." All that may be true, of course, but it's essentially a sentimental argument. As we've said, both the good thing and the bad thing about business relationships is that they're basically unsentimental. Business friendships are mainly significant when everything is going well. When problems arise in the workplace, it's amazing how fast good buddies can become strangers. Instead of talking about the past, emphasize what you can contribute in the now and in the future, provided this conflict is brought to a satisfactory end. This is your real bargaining chip. This is how you can show that it's in everyone's best interests if your needs are met. On the other hand, if you can't present yourself as a valuable asset to the future of the organization, your position is greatly weakened. So always be aware of what the company really needs and why those needs can't possibly be met without your contribution. Also, on the subject of the past, avoid using certain words and phrases that tend to perpetuate ongoing problems and drag them into the present situation. If the discussion gets heated, for example, you might find yourself telling someone, "You always do that," or "You never fail to act that way." These kind of negative descriptions tend to be self-fulfilling. In trying to resolve a conflict, it's much better to be aware of any positive changes, however small, and reinforce them. One of the most important instances of this principle occurred during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. As you may know, this was the closest the world has ever come to atomic war, with the U.S. and the Soviet Union facing off over the presence of Russian nuclear missiles in Cuba. At one point, the United States received what seemed to be a positive message from the Russians, suggesting a way that the conflict could be resolved. While President Kennedy and his advisors were studying the message, a second communication arrived, which was much more hard-line. At this point, Kennedy made a brilliant move. He decided to respond immediately to the first message and ignore the second one. Had he learned this gambit during his years with Jackie? Perhaps, but by reinforcing the positive rather than focusing on the negative, the world was literally saved. So remember this principle. It's assertive and it's effective. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, let's look on the bright side. Let's envision a scenario in which you have successfully brought the conflict to a resolution. In fact, let's assume that your needs have been met and that in conventional terms you could be considered the winner of the dispute. At this point, it's very important that you resist any temptation to do a dance in the end zone, as it were. If you don't leave the other party an honorable retreat, you can be certain the conflict will reignite at some point, and next time the outcome might not be so favorable. As we mentioned, this was something Lincoln understood as the Civil War drew to a close, and there was never again an open conflict between the states. It was something the Allies failed to understand at the end of World War I, and the result was economic catastrophe and the rise of Adolf Hitler. If you fail to be gracious at the end of a conflict in a business setting, you may not turn the other party into a fascist dictator, but you'll almost certainly come to regret your behavior. After all, the purpose of assertive conflict resolution is not a win, but a win-win. When you keep that in mind, you'll take a big step toward mastering people skills, not just mastering people. So far in our discussion of conflict resolution, we focused mostly on what is said. We've emphasized what to say and not to say. But the truth is, 90% of human interaction takes place through nonverbal communication. This includes facial expressions, gestures, and body language in general. It can also include your choice of clothing, what you order for lunch, or whether you're late or early for a meeting. People tend to react more to what we think someone means in the larger sense, beyond just what they say. This is especially true in conflict situations. For this reason, you need to pay just as much attention to your nonverbal signals as you do to your words, and body language is especially important in this respect. In fact, the power of body language is so strong that it can create trust or erode it almost instantly. So make no mistake, good nonverbal communication is a critical skill for conflict resolution. On the most obvious level, positive body language means smiling, making eye contact, and standing neither too close nor too far away from another person. But there's more to it than that. When you match or mirror the postures, gestures, and tone of voice of the other party, their brain receives some very reassuring signals, messages that say, "Hey, this person is just like me." Since people trust those who are most like themselves, you can think of nonverbal communication as kind of a dance. You're the follower, but by following well, you'll actually be able to take the lead. Once again, this is a good way to both prevent conflict and also to bring it to a positive resolution. Remember, the key is always to be as subtle and discreet as possible. The The purpose of mirroring, for example, is not to mimic precisely what the other person is doing. It's not a matter of scratching your head whenever they do. Rather, it's trying to capture the meaning of their action while keeping your intention outside their conscious awareness. So let's look at some specific techniques for achieving this result. First, keep yourself in sync by making sure that your body language, your words, and your tone of voice all match. Suppose someone is telling you how sorry he is about a perceived insult. You might be gratified by what he's saying, but what if his arms are tightly crossed against his chest? What if his eyes are rolling as he speaks? What if his whole nonverbal message is that he still thinks you're an enormous pain in the neck? In that case, the positive meaning of his words is a lot less assertive than the negativity of everything else. Second, when you're speaking forcefully with another person, maintain eye contact without staring or glaring, and don't forget to blink. To see how important this is, try looking in the mirror while just slightly squinting your eyes or looking off to the side. Even the smallest difference has a huge effect on how you're perceived. Third, assess the atmosphere and spirit of the interaction and match the other person's energy. Stand, walk, or sit just as they do. Do they walk fast or slow? Do they lean towards you in their chair or incline away from you? Then gradually adapt your position so that they match or mirror the other person. As we've said, don't make this too obvious. It's not a game of charades. It's using a basic people skill with subtlety and taste. In addition to matching gestures, match tone of voice as well. Voice tone is comprised of 3 elements: high or low pitch, fast or slow speed, and loud or soft volume. If the people around you are speaking in quiet tones or more emphatically, you should do the same. Fourth, make an effort to sound positive and enthusiastic, even if the discussion gets heated. People are always influenced by positive energy. So difficult though it may be, assertive conflict resolution means smiling and looking confident no matter what. If you start to feel uncontrollably hostile, take a deep breath or ask for a glass of water. Make a focused effort to improve your mood. Fifth, if you know you're going to have a meeting in which conflict may arise, make sure you're dressed appropriately. You can again use the mirroring principle simply by dressing as the situation requires. Next, pay special attention to the importance of the handshake. This is a time-honored gesture that has deep resonance in our culture, especially in terms of conflict resolution. After all, the original intention of a handshake was to show that the parties were not hiding knives in their hands. A firm handshake is an especially assertive sign. It's an excellent way of erasing the still prevalent assumption that women in business are less forceful than men. Finally, after any meeting in which conflict is surfaced, it's a very good idea to write a brief note to the other party in a positive and conciliatory tone. Do this win, lose, or draw. Write your note by hand on good stationery, personal stationery, not your business letterhead. A note like this is not just a communication, it's actually a gift. And when you give someone a gift, they tend to respond in kind. Above all, remember that conflict resolution is mostly based on intention. You know in your heart when you're ready to stop fighting. When you feel that impulse, don't let your ego prevent you from responding to it. By the same token, be alert for signs in the other party that they're ready to move in the direction of resolution. Often these signs are very small and subtle, but don't ignore them. Assertive conflict resolution means picking up on any positive sign and making the most of it. We've now reached the end of Session 11. Please join me for Session 12, in which we'll continue our discussion of conflict resolution and conclude our program on the 5 essential people skills. When we're angry with other people, enemies, we are giving them power over us, power over our sleep, our appetites, our blood pressure, our health, and our happiness. Our enemies would dance with joy if only they knew how they were worrying us, lacerating us, and getting even with us. Our anger hurts them not at all, but it turns our own days and nights into turmoil. Dale Carnegie. Welcome to Session 12. Here in the final session of the program, we'll conclude our discussion of assertive conflict resolution, and we'll see how this really connects with some other topics that are extremely important, not only for your career success, but for your life as a whole. Every day you're involved in many situations of potential conflict, settings in which your wants and needs are not the same as some other person's. In fact, since no two people are exactly alike, virtually every circumstance of your life falls into this category of experience. In all these situations where your desires differ from someone else's, there are three possible outcomes. First, you might emerge as the winner. You might get everything you want, while the other person gets nothing. Or the reverse might take place. You could be the loser. The other person's objectives are met and yours aren't. But in the real world, a complete win for either party is rare. Usually the result falls somewhere in between. There's give and take, and some form of compromise is reached. The situation is resolved, and the means by which this happens is negotiation. In a negotiated situation, there are conflict of interests. What one person wants isn't exactly what the other wants, but both sides prefer to search for solutions rather than giving in, walking away, or simply getting furiously angry with one another. Negotiation, therefore, is the name we give to conflict resolution by means other than mere interpersonal warfare. So for the next few minutes, we'll be looking in detail at strategies and tactics of effective negotiation, which is, after all, the medium through which conflict resolution takes place. Few people actually enjoy being in conflict with other human beings. Conflicts with supervisors, subordinates, or co-workers are not pleasant experiences, especially if the conflict becomes hostile. Negotiating a solution to conflict can be mentally exhausting and emotionally draining, but the process can be made easier by keeping your eye on the potential benefits. An effective negotiation can be a highly positive experience, both personally and professionally. The key from the outset is to identify the conflict and manage it rather than letting it spin out of control. In that way, the path can be made clear for a negotiated solution. When a conflict of interest exists, don't deny it, but don't escalate it either. Commit yourself to negotiating it. In itself, your commitment is an assertive people skill, and it should be the strong foundation of your approach to conflict resolution. If you're like many people, you may seek to avoid conflict when it arises, or deny it. But a better alternative is using conflict as a setting for your creative and assertive people skills. The modern corporation is becoming less based on titles and official power. There are fewer clear boundaries of responsibility and authority. As a result, conflict or potential conflict will be an even greater presence in the workplace of the future. Negotiation skills, therefore, can be a huge element in your career success. Moreover, there are some very specific and very powerful techniques that can very quickly make you an effective negotiator starting today. Skilled negotiators begin with a very important concept in mind. They know that it's important to satisfy their own needs, but they also see the importance of satisfying the other party. The goal is for you to feel that the conflict has been successfully resolved and for the other person to feel that way also. In short, you need to aim for a win-win outcome. The magic of a good negotiation is creating a win-win situation, even if it looks like a win-lose. The truth is, almost all negotiations have at least some elements of win-win, if you can find them. To help you do that, let's look at three fundamental strategic principles. These are, first, commitment to a win-win approach. Second, clarity about what you want and why you want it. And finally, a focused picture of your walk-away position. That is, the circumstances in which you'll need to end the negotiation without a resolution. Although this may seem like a worst-case scenario, assertive people skills will keep it from being no worse than it has to be. As a manager, try to refrain from viewing negotiation as a competitive endeavor in which you have to make a killing in order to emerge the winner. Even a so-called failed negotiation can be a stepping stone to forming relationships that can have long-term benefits for you and your company. In this sense, negotiation never really ends. One piece of failed negotiation can often be the start of the next phase. Each of these principles is essential to resolving conflict in a business setting, and we'll look at them in detail in a moment. As you begin the negotiation process, the mindset you bring to the experience is critically important. You must begin with the assumption that a win-win solution exists and that your task is to reveal it. Even if you have serious doubts about this deep in your heart, you must convince yourself that it's true. In other words, you must place the responsibility for a positive outcome on your own shoulders rather than on external circumstances or on the other party. This may seem like a tall order, but seeing yourself as the controlling factor is actually far preferable to putting your fate in someone else's hands. So make your mindset positive and make your self-determination the basis of that mindset. You're in control, and you're going to assert that control in a way that will be good for everyone. You have a much better chance of a win-win if you approach the negotiation with this sense of self-empowerment. From that perspective, it will be much easier to show your interest in the other side's concerns and your determination to find a win-win resolution. You can do this by trying to create alternatives that have high value to the other person, by phrasing options in ways that align you with the other person's interests, or even by allowing your opponent to declare victory. Generally speaking, there are two personality types among managers, and their different characteristics determine their negotiating style. Autocratic managers hold the view that they should get what they want when they interact with team members. Why? Simply because of their title and the hierarchy of the organization. Or because I'm the boss, they may think they're negotiating, but what they're really interested in doing is giving orders. In the process of handing out orders, autocratic managers don't realize the extent to which they may be antagonizing others. Even when the tasks they assign are completed, they may be carried out improperly or inefficiently. This is the phenomenon known as malicious obedience, in which an order is technically fulfilled, but subtly undermined at the same time. For instance, imagine an autocratic manager who sends his assistant out to get him a sandwich for lunch. The assistant comes back with a ham sandwich, and the manager yells at him, "You call this a lunch? Get me something decent to eat." So the assistant goes to a 5-star restaurant and gets a takeout lunch for $500. Technically, he's followed the order, but he's also used his obedience to aggress against the authority. Like buyer's remorse in the world of sales, malicious obedience is a frequent occurrence in a negotiation with an autocratic personality. A second negotiating type is the accommodating personality, which may be either a manager or a subordinate. Regardless of their status in the organization, they're more concerned with what others want than with their own needs. Sometimes, in order to avoid conflict, they don't negotiate at all and end up sabotaging their own interests. Since negotiation implies conflict, it's critical for these people to force a certain amount of compromise. This is the only way they can become effective participants in a business enterprise. Suppose you were going into a negotiation with either of the two personalities we've just described. What mindset would you want to adopt? Would it be positive or negative? Collaborative or confrontational? If you were dealing with an autocratic individual, would you let him or her set the stage for malicious obedience on your part? Would your hidden agenda be to win a guerrilla war against the big bully by at first letting him think he's won? Or if you were facing an extremely accommodating person, would you want to take advantage of that person's perceived weakness for your own benefit? In the short term, there might be a certain satisfaction in these hostile intentions on your part, but they would not really be assertive in the sense that we've been using that word. You might have asserted yourself against your adversary, but you have not asserted yourself against your own negative impulses. You have not entered the negotiation with a positive mindset. A positive mindset means seeing what is positive in the other person and in the situation as a whole, and maximizing that positive element. True, it may not be easy to deal with some of the extreme personalities we've just described. Assertive people skills often aren't easy, at least in the short term. But in the long run, using them well makes life much easier for everyone. It is critical to understand that negotiating can't be learned by following a prepackaged set of behaviors and applying them to all situations. That might work if everyone could be counted on to behave rationally and predictably, but they can't because people are often emotional and irrational. To negotiate well, you must prepare to use a variety of approaches depending on who's on the other side of the table. And the key word here is prepare. Prepare by knowing what you want and what the other person wants. Prepare for the other person's potentially abrasive or submissive behavior, and prepare to take responsibility for turning those elements into a win-win resolution. Most importantly, be clear about your real goals and real issues, and try to honestly identify the other person's real needs. Many negotiations fail because people are primarily worried about being taken advantage of. They lose sight of the authentic issues. They're more concerned about whether the other side won or even took a step in the direction of winning. This is a fundamentally weak approach, although it may try to portray itself as strength. During the war in Vietnam, for example, it took years before negotiations actually began between the United States government and the North Vietnamese. Finally, when the negotiations began, there was hope that substantial issues would be discussed and the conflict would finally move toward an end. Amazingly, the North Vietnamese immediately stalled progress by arguing about the size and shape of the negotiating table and what it would be made of. There was also the issue of how the table would be covered or whether it would be covered at all. Meanwhile, thousands of lives were being lost on the battlefield. While this was supposed to look like stern intransigence on the part of the North Vietnamese, it was really based on their feeling that if they gave in on even the smallest matter, their whole position would be undermined and might collapse. It was weakness masquerading as strength. It was failure to focus on a win-win because there was a preoccupation with not losing. This is our second strategic principle. After first committing yourself to a win-win outcome, be more clear about what you want and why you want it, and make a distinction between your real wants and needs and those that are just serving some superficial intention. Don't focus on the size or shape of the table because that's not what the negotiation is really about. Thirdly, be clear about the circumstances in which you would have to walk away from the negotiation. Or to put it another way, are there any situations in which you would walk away? If there aren't, there should be, because in any serious negotiation you must be prepared to break off if you see that your real needs can't be met. If you have $100,000 to buy a house and the seller wants $200,000, you can certainly begin an assertive negotiation. You can find many side issues to discuss and perhaps concessions will be made on either side. But if the seller continues to demand twice as much money as you've got, you must be prepared to walk away. Once it's proven to be hopeless, don't try to turn a failed negotiation into a perpetual motion machine, because something like that just doesn't exist in the real world. On the other hand, if you really and truly don't have a walk-away situation, and the other party is a determined negotiator, you can save everyone time by simply giving in at the outset. Let's return to the example of the house. Suppose you walk away from the seller who wanted $200,000, and you find a seller who wants $100,000, exactly the amount of money you have. But now a new thought strikes you. Maybe you should buy a house for $50,000 instead of spending every penny you have. Your conversation with the seller might go something like this. I like the house you're offering for $100,000, but I'm wondering if I can get just as good a house for $50,000, so I think I'll look around for a while. Well, says the seller, you can look around all you want, but I can assure you there are no houses like this one for $50,000. Despite this, you decide to explore the market. You want to have a 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage and a swimming pool. Those are your real needs in the situation, but as you look around, it begins to appear that the seller was right. There don't seem to be any houses like that for $50,000. If you want to be stubborn about it, you can keep looking in a wider and wider area, or you can wait and see what other houses come on the market. Maybe you could even wait for years. But if you really and truly need that 3-bedroom house and there are no others available, you actually have no walkaway position, and you will have to meet the seller's price. If that's the case, you might as well do it sooner rather than later, because if you don't, you're not being tough, you're just being stubborn. A useful concept here is the acronym BATNA, B-A-T-N-A, which was developed by research on negotiation strategies conducted by Harvard University. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement. Going into any negotiation, be very clear on your BATNA. That is the course you will take if you absolutely cannot reach an agreement. If you're negotiating over salary, for example, your alternatives might include a specific job elsewhere, a longer job search, or remaining at your current job. This is a crucial reference point because the BATNA establishes a threshold for the settlement. The outcome of the negotiation needs to match or do better than your BATNA. Determining your BATNA or walkaway position is not always easy. You have to establish a concrete value for various alternatives. For instance, you know the value of your current job, but is it worthwhile to take a $5,000 salary hike that involves moving to a new city? In simple negotiations, there may be just one issue like this, but often there are many variables that can make your walkaway point very elusive. What's more, it's almost equally important to determine the other party's BATNA. In fact, one goal of assertive negotiation could be to come as close to the other person's walkaway as you can. If and when you truly do arrive at your BATNA, here are some things you'll need to keep in mind. In most conflict situations in a corporate setting, you'll have a continuing relationship with the other person. So, don't leave the bargaining table with a gloomy attitude, and don't let the other party do that either. Again, it's not easy, but look at this as a test of your assertiveness and your people skills. By doing so, you'll open up the possibility for a better outcome at a later date. Here's an example of how this can work. Kim and Gretchen are both freelance graphic designers. A small publishing company had decided to bring out a new line of cookbooks, which would be very design-intensive. Kim and Gretchen were both hired to work on the new line. Although they don't know each other, they negotiated deals for themselves that came out to just about the same amount of money. Both of them were really excited about the new project. They were also gratified to get personal calls from Paul, the editorial director of the publishing company, who told them how great it made him feel to give them this break. That was on Friday. On the following Monday, the phone rang again at Kim's studio and in Gretchen's also. This time it wasn't Paul. It was his assistant who told the two designers that over the weekend, Paul had thought about the new project and had decided to cancel it. He was sorry, but that was his decision, and thanks for your time. Kim was instantly furious. First she gave Paul's assistant an earful, and then she quickly wrote an email to Paul himself. She told him that it had been extremely unprofessional to commit to something and then to suddenly back out of it. She mentioned that she had put other work on hold in order to keep herself available for this project, and now she had probably lost that business as well. Lastly, she pointed out how gutless it was of Paul to make his assistant deliver the bad news, and from a purely factual point of view, Kim was correct in just about everything she said. Gretchen was also angry when she got the call from Paul's assistant, but she knew that moments like this are the test of a professional's people skills. She spoke briefly but politely with the assistant, and then, like Kim, she wrote an email to Paul. She disciplined herself to express her appreciation for the opportunity, as well as her disappointment that it was not going to take place. And she closed with the hope that even though this didn't come through, perhaps there would be another project down the road. What was the outcome of this episode? First, within a year, Paul was gone from the publishing company. His former assistant took over his job, and one of his first acts was to sign on Gretchen for some major new work. He thought of calling Kim as well, but she had seemed so angry that he was sure she wouldn't want to work with him. In a walkaway situation, it's critical to address future possibilities, not current problems, and definitely not personalities. Resist the temptation to attack anyone personally. If the dialogue starts taking place on that level, people will just defend their self-esteem. Try to maintain a rational frame of mind, oriented towards your long-term goals. If necessary, let the other blow off steam without your taking it personally. Make it clear that you know the conflict is about the issues and it's not personal. This will help to prevent the other side from feeling angry and defensive, both now and when future opportunities come up. Beside the explicit strategies we've discussed, there are many intangibles that can influence the negotiation of a conflict. Subtle verbal and body language can make a difference in how the resolution progresses. Spend more time listening than talking, and make direct eye contact. Use the word "and" instead of "but." This sends the message that you're interested in the other party and are seeking common ground. More specifically, be very careful about using the phone, email, and other non-visual communication vehicles. A lack of facial expressions, vocal intonation, and other face-to-face cues can result in huge misunderstandings. Again and again, reiterate your interest in the other side's concerns and your determination to find a mutually satisfactory resolution. Sometimes the location where the negotiation takes place can be important. Is it happening in a space where you or the other party is uncomfortable, or perhaps too comfortable? In an office environment, there's always the sense that things have to go through official channels, and people have to live up to their reputations. If possible, go outside for a coffee or even just to walk around the block. As a general rule, anything is better than meeting in someone's carefully constructed personal fortress. If you have had previous experience in conflict resolution with this person, be aware of how this history might affect the present situation. If it was a positive experience, frame the new interaction in that context. If it was negative, find a way of starting fresh if that's possible. Otherwise, consider asking someone else to handle the negotiation on your behalf. Be aware that people place very different importance on elements of a conflict. For example, in negotiating for a job, you may place a high value on location and less on salary, or vice versa. Be mindful of your subjective viewpoints and try to ascertain the other party's also. Knowing what is really valued, not just quantified, is a big part of assertive conflict resolution. And always be aware of time pressure, and if there isn't any, create some. In a business or corporate negotiation, every step in conflict resolution should have a what-by-when time frame attached to it. Otherwise, the principle of work expanding to fill the time available will take hold, even if it takes forever. Finally, here's a thought that applies not only to conflict resolution, but to all the people skills we've discussed in these sessions. It comes from Roger Fisher, a former professor at Harvard, and the co-author of Getting to Yes, one of the best-selling negotiating books of all time. Roger Fisher said, "Be unconditionally constructive. Approach a conflict with this attitude. I accept you as an equal negotiating partner. I respect your right to differ. I will be receptive." Some criticize my approach as being too soft, but negotiating by these principles is a sign of strength. Each day and each week, all of us engage in so many interactions, but that doesn't mean we become better at it. To become better, we need awareness of the structure and dynamics of people skills. We need to think clearly, objectively, and critically. And above all, we need to act assertively. There is no one best style of assertive people skills. You'll need to find the tools and techniques that are most effective for you. So try out the ideas we've explored in these sessions and see what works best. But a few ideas quoted by Dale Carnegie come as close as possible to being universal principles. Here they are. Have unlimited patience. Never corner other people, and always assist them in saving face. In order to see through other people's eyes, put yourself in their shoes. Avoid self-righteousness like the devil. And above all, take action. Inaction breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. If you want to conquer the negative elements in your life, don't sit home and think about it. Go out and get busy. By listening to these 12 sessions, you've taken a big step toward getting busy in just the way Dale Carnegie recommended. Thank you for being with us in our exploration of the 5 essential people skills. And good luck in all that you do.
What do you really want out of life? It's a big question. In many ways, it's a very personal question. But when you get right down to it, as different as we all are, the things we're searching for in life are essentially the same. You want to be happy. You want to feel good. You want to enjoy the time you've been given. You want a job you really love. You want the relationships in your life to be healthy and enriching and wonderful. You want enough money so that you don't have to worry about money. You want to develop the skills to do something meaningful with your life, something that contributes to the world in a positive way and fulfills your sense of purpose. By listening to this program, you've discovered that information does exist to help you become skilled in one area of your life. Now you can get the information to become skilled in absolutely anything. Even your spirituality can be strengthened by developing the right skills. And skills, quite simply, are the secret to success. Ask anyone who has ever achieved their dreams. They'll tell you that skills are the key. Many people never learn these kinds of life skills because they're not taught in school. You have to go out and get them on your own. But where do you go? The fact that you're listening to this program now means you're already part of the way there. Why not go all the way? We are the Nightingale Conant Corporation, and for over 40 years, we have been the world's leading producer and publisher of powerful audio information for personal development. But we're much more than just a company. For tens of thousands of satisfied customers around the world, we're their partner in success, a one-stop source for ideas, information, and inspiration to create an extraordinary life. No matter what you want to accomplish in your life right now, we have a program that addresses your needs and interests. Whether you're looking to redesign your business, master powerful investing techniques, conquer procrastination, build a better vocabulary, enhance your conversational skills, or raise your consciousness spiritually. Our vast audio program library contains hundreds of titles covering every subject in the personal development spectrum. Our authors are world-renowned experts in their fields. And our information is delivered to you via the most powerful and convenient method available, audio. Audio learning is today's fastest growing media for training, education, and self-improvement. And the reason is simple. Audio programs give you the one thing you need more than anything else: time. Unlike books, classes, or even internet research, which force you to find or make time for learning, audio programs actually put more time into your life by turning the hundreds of hours a year you spend driving, commuting, or just lying around into valuable opportunities to build skills, master new ideas, and increase your knowledge. And because audio programs are able to deliver information on a powerful subconscious level, learning is almost effortless. The average person spends at least an hour a day in their car. That's at least 7 hours a week, or even more, 365 hours in a year. That's incredibly valuable time you could now spend learning, listening to a powerful Nightingale Conant program. You could literally turn your car into a university on wheels. However you happen to come to our family, you've received a great gift. Many people never discover this information, but somehow, for some reason, it did find you. Now, you can become the author of your own destiny by developing the skills that will help you create the life you want. And you can do it with the power of audio learning from the Nightingale Conant Corporation. Call us now today toll-free at 1-800-525-9000. That's 1-800-525-9000. And talk to one of our program consultants. They can help you find the perfect program for your current interests and needs. You can also visit us on the web at www.nightingale.com. That's www.nightingale.com. Happiness, satisfaction, a great family, good health, real career fulfillment, financial peace, a strong, focused life purpose. You know the things you want out of life, and you know how to get them. Take that next step. Call 1-800-525-9000 or visit us at www.nightingale.com.